sastu saha. Translation Srila Prabhupada. The working senses are superior to dull matter. Mind is higher than the senses. Intelligence is still higher than the mind. And he, the soul, is even higher than the intelligence. Text number 43. Evam buddhe param buddhva samstabhyatmanam atmana jahi shatrum mahapaho kamarupam durasadham. Translation Srila Prabhupada. Thus, knowing oneself to be transcendental to the material senses, mind and intelligence, O mighty Arjuna, one should steady the mind by deliberate spiritual intelligence, Krishna consciousness, and thus by spiritual strength conquer this insatiable enemy known as lust. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhaktivedanta Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So, to begin with, we see in the previous couple of verses, Arjuna is asking how to control this lust. And Krishna is told in the previous verse that the senses, mind, and the intelligence are the sitting places of the lust. And through them, the lust covers the real knowledge of the living entity and bewilders sin. Therefore, O best of the Bhartas, in the very beginning, curb this great symbol of sin by regulating the senses and slay this destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. So we see that actually this lust covers the real knowledge of the soul. And what we need to understand is what is the lust and how it affects. Now, Arjuna is asking, why is it that one is impelled to commit these sinful activities even if one is not willing to do that? So lust is the main enemy that impels a person to commit sinful activities. So what is lust? Lust means activities by which one tries to satisfy his own senses. It's called lust. Whereas the activities which are performed to satisfy the senses of Krishna are called love. So originally, our constitutional position is to render service to the Lord and develop love by devotional service. Now, unfortunately, the lust covers this real knowledge, and whereby we are also conditioned in this material world. So, how to overcome this lust is what is mentioned in sloka number 42. Krishna explains that the body, which is made up, this material body, which is made up of gross element and subtle elements, gross elements like earth, water, fire, and ether, is nothing but a dull matter. So, bodily and all our bodily actions are performed through the senses. And the lust also bends through the senses. So the senses through which lust is given is giving way are, for example, the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, etc. Now, the senses are, it is said that the senses are higher than the sense objects. But the senses are drawn toward the sense objects. So therefore, sense objects are considered to be higher than the body itself. Now, the mind, it is mentioned here, is higher than even the senses. And the intelligence is higher than the mind. And the soul is even higher than the intelligence. Now, here the process is explained. For example, if we find in a corporate, big corporate, the entire organization may be engaging in some unhealthy practices. Say, for example, corruption. So it may be going on from the top all the way to from the CEO to the lowest person sitting in the corporate. Now, instead of trying to eliminate or remove everybody from that, just by removing the top head of the company and replacing with a good person, everybody will get corrected. So similarly, the hierarchy of the bodily elements are mentioned here, whereby from which we understand that by giving a higher engagement right from the top, that is the soul itself, all the other rest, like the intelligence, the mind and all, they are all given the proper engagement. And steps are taken to stop them from indulging in unhealthy practices. So, but unfortunately, what is happening is it is all now working in a reverse order. A reverse order means now, for example, whenever we go out, we see a person may be taking a dog for a walk. But instead of the owner taking the dog for a walk, we see that many times the dog pulls the owner. Most of the times it is the dog who pulls the owner. So similarly, actually, with the proper understanding of the hierarchy and proper application, the senses can be brought under control. But otherwise, what happens is that the senses pull everybody for the sense satisfaction, and the soul becomes conditioned in this material world. So the highest possible and the best possible engagement for the soul is to be situated in its constitutional position as an eternal servitor of the super soul. So this can be achieved by engaging the soul in the service of the Lord by using of proper intelligence. Now, intelligence is that which one enables a person, by which it enables a person to understand what is right and wrong and what is good and bad. So by proper intelligence, when one engages in the service of the super soul, then what happens is that the soul is connected to the super soul, which is the constitutional position. The intelligence is engaged, and by engaging the intelligence through proper intelligence, the mind is also engaged in the service of the Lord, by which then the senses are automatically engaged in the service of the Lord. For example, mind is one that keeps jumping like a monkey from one branch of a tree to another. So the mind and the senses, they cannot be controlled as it is. They cannot be left in an idle position. They are there they are always active. It is said that the mind is active even when one is sleeping. For example, one gets dreams while sleeping. That is because the mind is active. So they cannot be stopped from any engagement. But by giving a proper engagement, the tendency to engage the senses and the mind in the lower activities is stopped. Now, bodily action means functions of the senses. Body acts through the senses, and one cannot stop these senses. So, but the mind is active. But what happens is that when we use our proper intelligence, the intelligence gives us not only discrimination, but also determination to do something properly. So if the soul is directly engaged with the Supreme, then naturally what happens, all the other subordinates, namely like intelligence, mind, and the senses, will automatically be engaged. So the mind is such that the mind can accept what is right, what it thinks is right, and reject it what is not favorable. It accepts what is favorable and rejects what is not favorable. So through proper intelligence, one can discriminate the right and wrong and use the intelligence to serve Krishna. Now, one has to either serve Krishna or serve Maya, because the tendency to serve is there in the senses as well as the mind. So if one does not serve Krishna, one has to serve Maya. But by serving Krishna, automatically one tends to lose his interest in serving Maya. That's why there is a mention here of param drishtva nivartate. That means by giving a higher engagement, superior engagement, one's tendency to engage in the service of Maya is automatically eliminated. We'll go through some examples. For example, the tongue wants to eat some nice palatable dishes that are available in the street. So, but the same thing, the tongue can be used to cook something, maybe even the same item at home, and offer it to the Lord, which becomes prasadam, which is a means of purification. Whereas the same thing, when the tongue is used to eat palatable, that is palatable available in the street, one gets attracted to sense gratification, And that is the difference between sense gratification, that is lust, and the love. So if we honor prasadam that is offered to Krishna, that is a sort of a devotional service, which can give us love for Krishna. Similarly, the ears want to hear some nonsense like pop music or rock music or whatever, or they want to hear some gramya katha, unwanted talks. But the same ear can be used for hearing Krishna katha and also some kirtan, etc. Similarly, the hands want to touch something very soft. The nose wants to smell something that is gratifying to the nose. The hands want to touch the hands want to touch something very soft. So this way, all the senses want to engage for sense gratification. But these same senses can be utilized everything in the service of Krishna. So these thoughts come from the senses, and the mind is filled up with these thoughts. So if the thoughts are pure, then the mind also is always remain in a calm situation. But if the thoughts are impure, then the mind is always disturbed. The mind is also dirty, and the mind is also disturbed. Therefore, we don't find any happiness by these thoughts. So when these thoughts come to the mind, it should be directed to the intelligence, and the intelligence should be guided. That intelligence is that, here there is a mention about spiritual intelligence. One might have some material intelligence also by means of higher qualifications or better some experiences, etc. But the real intelligence is that which is guided by sadhu, shastra, and guru. Otherwise, what happens? The intelligence is also dictated by mind. So Narad Muni explains that one becomes the husband of a prostitute. He loses all his independence. Similarly, one whose intelligence is polluted, it prolongs his material life, and the same intelligence drives him to frustration by the conditions of material nature. So many times we see people quoting intelligence quotient and actually so forth, but actually they are all information quotient. And as per Srimad Bhagavatam, they are nothing but ignorance quotient. So the path of realization is Krishna consciousness. So Krishna is asking Arjuna to focus his intelligence on Krishna and then fight. Arjuna was reluctant to fight, but now Krishna is asking to focus his intelligence on Krishna and then fight. So Krishna also says in Bhagavad-gītā 15:15, Sarvasya Chaham Buddhi Sannivishta. Because from me comes the intelligence, remembrance, and also forgetfulness. So if at all sometimes we get some intelligence from Krishna, that is also, it is the mercy of Krishna, it comes from Krishna only. What we talk about the spiritual intelligence, even material intelligence, what we might be thinking that we are having, they are all from Krishna, come from Krishna only. Now, the difference is that if you see the animal, they all have their intelligence, but their intelligence is used only to fight amongst themselves. The spider also is given an intelligence to construct a web, which a human being cannot do. So, but the ants, if you see, they go always on a straight line. If they are together, they all go in a straight line, which may be in a very disciplined, which the human beings don't follow. So these intelligence are given to all the species of life, and they all come from Krishna to the respective species of life. So during Srila Prabhupada's time, there is an incident where one time he went to Kurukshetra, and at that time he went around, and at that time a devotee came to him along with many of his followers. He took Srila Prabhupada around many of the sites, because Srila Prabhupada was looking for a site for a temple at that time. So this devotee took Srila Prabhupada around with many of his disciples, but Srila Prabhupada was interested in a site near Jyotisar, where the Lord recited Bhagavad-gītā to Arjuna. And then when Srila Prabhupada asked for a site near that this devotee replied that you have to pay a very high price for that because it is very expensive. Then Srila Prabhupada said that he's not interested in paying a price for it. So then in the course of discussion, he mentions that Srila Prabhupada should make a presentation for the youth, because as they are all lost in wilderness. Then gradually Srila Prabhupada asked Srila Prabhupada, did the Lord really speak Bhagavad-gītā to sun god Vivaswan, and did Vivaswan really exist? This devotee asked Srila Prabhupada. So that is what is called speculative intelligence, which is also mentioned in this purpose. That there are many people who have a lot of intelligence which is more speculative in nature. And this type of intelligence does not give one the proper discrimination and determination. They are more speculative in nature. So one of the greatest obstacle is that getting into discussions on these subjects which are more speculative in nature. Now, the spirit soul is even higher than intelligence and is transcendental in nature. The spirit soul actually wants to be connected to the super soul, who is also in spiritual nature, transcendently through a transcendental activity, that is devotional service. And when that is done based on Sadhu Shastra and Guru, then the soul derives the pleasure, which is its original position. And that comes by rendering of service to the super soul. So there are 4 types of activity that is mentioned in this particular sloka. One is a sensual activity. Activities based on sensual platform. Activities based on mental platform. Then the activities based on intellectual platform, and those on the spiritual platform. And except for the transcendental activities or activities based on the spiritual platform, all others are only causes of bringing one to distress. It does not give one any happiness. So here, a neophyte devotee is actually advised to keep aloof from these objects of the senses initially. Why? Because there is a tendency for a neophyte to do some devotional service and at the same time to engage in sense gratification. But when one tries to initially keep away from the senses, from the sense objects, his determination by using the intelligence becomes perfect. And one has to strengthen his mind by use of this intelligence. And if by using the right intelligence, one engages his mind in Krishna consciousness, by complete surrender unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then automatically the mind becomes stronger. And even if the senses are, though the senses are strong, they are just like serpents from which the venom is taken out. Now, serpents, snakes are very harmful. When they bite, they inject a poison on the body of the person on whom they are bitten. But once the venom is taken off, then that bite of the snake has no effect at all. So similarly, if the senses are engaged for a higher purpose, that is engaged in the service of the Lord, then it is as good as the venom has been taken off. They don't have interest in engaging in lower propensities, lower type of activities. So that is why it is advised that the neophyte should try to regulate the senses and initially try to keep away from the sense objects. Example is given that, in a room there is a lot of dust that has fallen from a lot of places, from windows, from maybe whatever 2 windows or 3 windows. Now, if a person keeps the window open in a dusty place, even if you clean the room with a broom or whatever it is, the dust keeps falling. So that is why, to have it nicely clean, one has to close the windows, and then if one cleans the floor, then all the dust is taken out. But otherwise, on one side, one will be cleaning the floor, and on the other side, the dust will be falling from the windows. So similarly, if one tries to keep the senses towards the sense objects, initially by practicing some devotion service also, it will be like the floor getting dusted on one side, and because the windows that are open. So one should initially try to keep his senses away from sense gratification. And the conditioning stage of a soul is given such that a living entity, when he develops an interest for sense gratification, in whatever condition he may be, in whatever material body he may be, he still has that tendency to utilize the senses for sense gratification. Example is given in the Shastras as to how Indra was once cursed to become a hog. And when he came down to take the birth of a hog, this curse was supposed to last for some duration. At the end of the duration, when Lord Brahma came to call him back to heavenly planet to take up his rule again, Indra was reluctant to leave because he was already used to utilizing his senses as the body of in the body of a hog. So he was reluctant. So the point is that the tendency to enjoy the senses for sense gratification continues in whatever body if we are, at whatever circumstances we may be. That is what is that is why it is called conditioning of the soul. So sense gratification, there are two things. One is called Vishya and one is Vishaya. Now, Vish is actually poison, but Vishaya it is said that it is more poisonous than the poison is more poisonous than Vish itself, because a poison does not kill unless it enters the body. But Vishaya, the objects of sense gratification, are such that it kills a person even when one contemplates on it. For example, while passing by the street, if one sees a male sees a attractive form of a woman, so even before one dwells, puts his minds onto it, the mind becomes filled with thoughts of sense gratification just by contemplating on it. Whereas a poison acts only if one enters into the body. So that is why it is called that the objects of sense gratification are such that it can poison a person even when one contemplates on it. Then we come to text number 43, which is the concluding sloka for this particular chapter, where hereby Krishna concludes by saying, thus knowing oneself to be transcendental to the material senses, mind and intelligence, O mighty arm Arjuna, one should steady the mind by deliberate spiritual intelligence, that is Krishna consciousness, and thus by spiritual strength conquer this insatiable enemy known as lust. So one has to conquer this lust. So how here Krishna concludes that one should consider himself to be transcendental to the material senses, mind and intelligence. That means the soul is transcendental by nature. But because of the conditioning, there is a desire to lord over the material nature. And therefore, the desire for sense gratification is prevalent in the greatest form, in the highest form. But by strength of Krishna consciousness, or by utilizing one's senses in the service of Krishna, one can control the material senses, the mind, and also the intelligence. One may not be able to give up the work or the prescribed duties all of a sudden, but by gradually developing this Krishna consciousness, one can be situated in a transcendental position without being influenced by the material senses and mind, by steady intelligence which is directed towards one's pure identity. This steady intelligence is that which is what is called spiritual intelligence, and that comes from Krishna. So one should try to come to an understanding that he is transcendental to the material senses and mind and intelligence. And by one should steady his mind by deliberate spiritual intention, that is Krishna consciousness. So normally in an immature stage of material existence, philosophical speculations, artificial attempts are there to control the senses. Many people try to promote yoga, and by which they say that they will be able to control the senses and the mind, etc. But these artificial postures and exercises do not help one in controlling. Examples are given in the Shastras as to how Vishwamitra, he was deep in meditation, but as soon as he heard the tinkling of the ankle bells of Menaka, immediately his meditation got disturbed. Like that, there are so many examples. Saubhara was a great transcendentalist. He was a great yogi also. He could perform tapasya for many thousands and thousands of years. But when he was, one time he decided to go underneath the water and perform meditation for many thousands of years. And all of a sudden, he saw two fish mating with each other. Immediately, his senses got disturbed and he wanted to engage his senses for sense gratification. So that is how powerful the senses are. By just seeing two fish mating underneath the water, his meditation got spoiled and he wanted to marry. So the point is that the senses are very, very powerful. But when one gives them a higher engagement by engaging the activities in Krishna consciousness, then automatically the senses are given higher engagement. By smelling the tulasi that is offered to the lotus feet of the Lord, the Kumaras got converted from impersonalist to personalist. This is an example given in Srimad Bhagavatam. So whenever we smell the flowers and tulasi that are offered to the Lord, this smelling tendency is utilized in the service of the Lord. When we honor Krishna Prasadam, we are utilizing the tongue in the service of Krishna. Similarly, by speaking Krishna Katha, we are always engaging the tongue in Krishna Katha, and we are giving him a transcendental activity. Similarly, when we hear Krishna Katha, when we hear the Kirtan of the glorifying the holy names of the Lord, we are giving them a higher engagement. So this way, similarly, the eyes, instead of seeing the external artificial beauty of this material world, whatever we see in the material world, everything is temporary, nothing is permanent. If anyone looks very attractive, that beauty does not last for a very long time. Even when we see when a child is born, he looks very, very smart and very attractive. Even the child's smile is something that by which one gets carried away. But as the child grows up, we see that the smile does not have the original natural attraction which he was having as a child, because as one grows, then his mind and his thoughts, activities, everything get contaminated. So everything that we see in this material world is temporary and they are mostly artificial. But the same thing, by engaging in Krishna's activities, one can purify these senses. So whatever so-called these yoga institutes, etc., they try to promote, but they're all substandard activity which really cannot give the room for purification. Many, in fact, promote sex through religion, in the name of religion. They are all speculative ideas, and they are mostly a disturbance in the society. So, in fact, Lord Brahma said, the most lamentable people are those who consider Krishna as an ordinary person. This is another speculative example. Many times people, if they don't understand the position of Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, they look at him as an ordinary person. This is a mental speculation. So these are all called mental terrorists, who are always speculative and writing literatures which kill the faith in the personality of Godhead. There are many people who comment on Bhagavad-gītā without understanding the position of the Supreme Lord as a person. So they say the Lord is impersonal in nature. His activities are impersonal. But these are all mental speculation, and they all kill one's faith in the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So on a subtle level, it is said that mental speculation is as good as gambling. Whereas in a gross level, it may be betting with money. But on a subtle level, mental speculation is as good as gambling. So with this third chapter of, in this last sloka of Bhagavad-gītā, Lord is conclusively directing Arjuna to practice Krishna consciousness, and by knowing oneself to be become eternals, by knowing or understanding and application oneself to be an eternal servant of the personality of Godhead, one can purify all his senses, his mind and intelligence. So with this, I conclude the class for the day. Any of you have got any questions for the next minute or two, you can ask me.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Krishna Mataji.
Nice class, Prabhu. Thank you so much. I was a little bit confused when you told everybody's given intelligence. Is it that I thought we human beings are differentiated with our intelligence? And also walking, you gave that example.
Yes.
Can you just elaborate a little bit on my confusion too?
Now, intelligence is given by the Lord. The Lord also. Now, at the same time, what happens is that when the intelligence is not used in the right perspective, for example, I gave the example of yoga. Many people promote yoga as a means to control the mind and senses. And there are examples where it has been a failure also, and we see it on a day-to-day basis also. The very word yoga itself is connecting with the Supreme. So yoga is an activity by which one connects the soul to the super soul by meditating on the form of the Lord, who is situated in the heart. But this point is something that generally most of those who run these institutions, they are not aware of. So they speculate. So this is speculative activity. The Lord is giving intelligence to everybody, but the intelligence is not used in the right perspective. So intelligence becomes perfect when one utilizes it under the guidance of Sadhu, Shastra and Guru. Particularly when it comes to spiritual activities. A person may be a great scientist by means of his intelligence, but if his intelligence is not based on Sadhu, Shastra and Guru, then the intelligence need not be perfect. For example, many speculate also whether there is how many moons are there, how many suns are there. But all these things are given in the Shastra. So if one utilizes the intelligence based on Sadhu, Shastra and Guru, then that intelligence becomes perfect. Otherwise, many of the times it can be speculative in nature also, which is mentioned here. And that is what happens in today's world, particularly as far as spiritual matters are concerned. There's so many speculative theories, people don't know who is God also. So all these are given in the Shastra. So intelligence should be based on Sadhu, Shastra and Guru.
Okay. Thank you.
Hare
Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Dandavat pranam.
Hare Krishna, Mataji.
Pranam to everybody.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Dandavat pranam.